Hi, welcome to the
History of South Africa.
South Africa. We're going to shove a bunch of juicy chunks of South African history into a 5 to 10 minute video because that's our allotted time frame.
Okay, first things first. The people of South Africa were originally hunter-gatherers, which means they ran around everywhere looking for helpful things like water, food sources, shelter. Never settled down. They were independent hunter-gatherers living off nothing but the land.
They had sheep, man.
So independent hunter-gathering nature experts with sheep.
So they were, chilling, traveling around everywhere with their pet sheep, having a blast. Till one of them was like, "Hey, yo, I heard about this cool thing named farming." And everybody was like, "What's a farm?" And then he was like, "This thing where we don't have to worry about where we find food."
A group of the South Africans were like, yeah, that sounds pretty dope, man. But some of the others were like, nah, that's whack. We good with the sheep. So South Africa split into 2 different classes of people, the hunter-gatherers and the farmers.
The farmers were successful, but they were just real jerks about it and kept rubbing it in the hunter-gatherers' faces.
We're better, because we have food.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. The hunter-gatherers had a lot of time on their hands because they weren't spending it all on stupid farming. So they were like, hey, let's make some cool junk. And they began crafting pottery and metal stuff and other dope things.
And then they were like, psst, hey, let's sell this cool junk. And they began trading.
This cool junk got even cooler, like ostrich eggs, and copper and shells, and then
ivory! And everyone in South Africa got pretty stacked trading with other people.
But their prosperity and resources got some attention from some creeps across the water.
Hey there.
Hi.
You're looking pretty good there. Is that ivory I see?
Yeah.
Can we tap that?
No.
Please?
No.
We'll help globalize trade.
Okay.
The Dutch came into South Africa in 1652 and helped globalize trade, but they were still sketchy, like really sketchy, like watch out.
Then they started really, really gross things like the transatlantic slave trade, which is referred to as the African diaspora, because the people in Africa were suddenly dispersed into the Western world to be mistreated as slaves.
The Dutch were weird. They kept talking about this one guy who died but then didn't die, and then he just left. And how when he died, or didn't die, it actually saved the entire earth.
They did have a couple of neat things, though, like medicine and formal education and technology.
Beep, beep, beep. Warning. Side effects of colonization. Destruction of tradition and culture. Start dressing all weird. Viral disease.
Since South Africa was colonized, different peeps from Europe started coming, and basically, things started falling apart.
Ah, I see what you did there.
Thank you. I try.
You're doing really great, sweetie.
That means a lot. I don't really get validation and...
Back to South Africa. The native people were basically forced into a lower class of their society, even though it was their freaking country to begin with. Not cool.
They had little say in the new colonial government, and the South Africans were pissed, rightfully so, because they were forced to work to pay taxes. And this lasted for way too long, like pretty damn long, like up until the 20th century long.
It's time for something. It's time for our South African author of the day, Nadine Gordimer.
She was born November 20th, 1923 in Springs, Gauteng, South Africa. She was a hella dope novelist and short story writer whose themes focused on exile, black struggle, and alienation.
She wrote about fancy stuff like personal isolation and social justice and effects of South Africa from racial discrimination and oppression embedded in the long-time modern colonial institutions.
She must be great at parties.
Her works include The Conservationist, Crimes of Conscience, and Get a Life. She was the first South African to win the Nobel Prize for Literature.
Sweet.
Well, she died in 2014.
Oh, rip.
Let's get back to our scheduled program.
So the people of South Africa were boiling mad, and they were like, hey, this really sucks. Because it did really suck. And then they decided, let's revolt.
In the 20th century, resistant movements began gaining more power and momentum. After World War II, they started forming their own political parties.
And they were pretty real fellas. They didn't care about being popular. They just were, because they were awesome. And soon enough, the South Africans started aspiring for self-government. And they got a ton of support. People were like, yeah, let's be politically independent, man.
The colonizers didn't like that. They were like, no. No thank you. No revolution today, please. But the South Africans kept going, cause mama ain't raised no.
Basically, the South Africans used the education the colonizers gave them in the first place to get them off their back.
But then in 1961, this one guy had really gained a lot of popularity. His name was Nelson Mandela, but the colonizers threw him and a lot of resistance leaders in jail because they were low-key jealous, and they still sucked.
But that was a big no-no, because other countries saw, and they were like, hey, that's not very groovy, man. So the other countries were told by the big boy United Nations General Assembly to embargo the sale of guns and stuff with South Africa in support of the resistance in 1973.
Yee, it was basically a big middle finger to the white settlers.
And after this, the white settlers gave up their monopolies of political power pretty easily and pretty peaceful, surprisingly.
Everything's a bit cooler there now. Some parts of South Africa are struggling to catch up on technology and world relations and stuff like that. They weren't really prepared to develop their country to be urban like the rest of the world. But they were like, meh, we'll wing it. We got the power now.
There was bad economics and technological advances and a struggle with undefined cultural history.
But there's a lot of stuff that's similar to the book.
They both were colonized and saw the destruction of their culture. They were both used by outsiders for personal gain, and there was a crap ton of division between the local people.
In the book, we don't really see where the colonization leads, but in South African history, its evolution can be seen throughout centuries.
So yeah, that's kind of where it ends. But they're regrowing and rebuilding, and they have political power now, which is really good. The end.
Bye!